All right, everybody. Good morning. The best of mornings, in fact, about as good a morning as you will find, because yesterday was not a dream. Yesterday really happened. The Seattle Seahawks really won the Super Bowl, and they are world champions until next year. So that's just like the starting point, right? And if you're like me, you're still kind of on cloud nine. You're still just trying to process that. You're still just trying to digest the fact that this team that was a preseason long shot to even make the playoffs is now the best team in the league. And I use that phrase for a specific reason because the Super Bowl champ is not always the best team in the league. But this Seahawks team, I think, pretty clearly is. And not only that, I believe this Seahawks squad is one of the better teams in NFL history. All right, guys, hold up because my friends at Sleeper are introducing some new features, and I want to tell you guys about them before we go any further. Sleeper is launching Team Picks, a new prediction market product. So now, on top of all the over-unders you can pick over on their Sleeper app, you can now pick on games. For instance, if you take a look to my left on the screen right now, you can see you can make a pick on the Super Bowl. They also have some bonuses available on over-unders for players. So there's now way more stuff you can get up to over on Sleeper. Get on over there before the Super Bowl, and don't forget to use the promo code SBN for a 100% match up to $100 on your first deposit. And don't forget to utilize the free $20 entry that you get just for making an account. So the Super Bowl is almost here. Make sure you get on Sleeper and have some fun with sports. And I definitely want to hammer that because I think sometimes it's kind of hard to realize how good things are in the moment. It's things like that, conversations like that tend to really pick up years after the fact. But I think you can recognize greatness in the moment, and I want to recognize this greatness in the moment because I do think that this 2025 Seahawks squad is obviously they're not as good as the 85 Bears, the 91 Redskins, some of the 49ers teams with Joe Montana at quarterback, the 96 Packers. I'm not saying they're one of the best ever, but I think that this team, with how complete they are and how they were able to win every way a team can win, belongs in a pretty lofty conversation historically. Think about the season that the Seahawks just had. They played one of the tougher schedules in the league, mostly by virtue of the fact that they were in the toughest division in the league and one of the toughest divisions in the history of the NFL. You had 3 teams in the division win at least 12 games, and you had the teams in the division win a combined, I believe, 6 playoff games, and the only playoff games that the division lost were to each other. And despite playing that schedule and being in that division, you go 14-3. All of your losses come down to the final, not even couple minutes, like literally the final minute. And as the season went on, you showed the ability to win in so many different ways. Early in the season, they were winning mostly with big explosive plays, downfield throws to JSN. As the season went on, they started to get a little bit more methodical. The run game started to take over, and the offensive line started to fall into its groove a little bit. And the offensive line by the end of the year was actually a really solid unit overall. Even earlier in the year, though, the offensive line was definitely showing some really positive signs. Darnold was barely getting sacked. He was on pace to break an all-time record for fewest sacks by a starting Seattle quarterback, until very late in the season. But he still ended up barely getting sacked this year compared to other starting quarterbacks. You had the best offensive player in football in JSN, the Offensive Player of the Year winner. And for as much as some people are going to get hung up on certain things, oh, the Seahawks didn't have an elite quarterback, because Sam Darnold was not elite this year. He briefly looked like an MVP candidate, but that was definitely kind of gone by the second half of the season. And they're going to say things like, well, the running game wasn't very effective until the second half of the year. And those things are true. They're going to say they didn't have a dominant tight end. They didn't have a dominant number two receiver. The offensive line wasn't elite. It did have problems, but bottom line, point blank, this team was third in scoring in 2025. Whatever criticisms you have of them, they were third in scoring. And some of that is because they were really good at scoring on non-offensive plays. They scored on turnovers. They scored on special teams. But this was still a really good offense. In fact, it was more or less the best offense in franchise history. So whatever criticisms you have of them, they put points on the board. The defense, best in the league by points per game, EPA per play, and DVOA. They forced turnovers at a high rate. They got sacks at a high rate. They had one of the highest pressure rates. They had the top run defense in football. Nobody ran on them except the Rams a little bit. They lived in nickel, but they didn't suffer for it at all up front. They had no major coverage liabilities. A couple guys would give up plays every now and then, but no one person on that defense was giving up a bunch of stuff through the air every week. It was schematically sound. It had a bunch of different angles it could throw at you. I mean, yesterday we saw Mike McDonald throw blitzes at Drake May that the Seahawks had not run at all during the season. So the ammunition they had to throw at these teams, it is so far beyond what other teams even consider being able to do for the most part. And you had depth in the secondary. Players would get hurt and they would still find a way to get the job done. They would lose pass rushers and they still had enough depth to get the job done. They went 4 deep at edge. They had the best interior defensive line in football. It was truly, and I know that there are Houston fans and Denver fans and fans of maybe one or two other teams that protest this. In my mind, this Seahawks team easily had the number one defense in football this year, and I think they proved it yesterday in the Super Bowl. And then you have the special teams, which was the best in football as well. We had an incredible kicker who actually broke the all-time NFL record for scoring in a single season, if you include the playoffs. Made every kick in the postseason, by the way. We had an incredible punter who, by the way, almost could have won Super Bowl MVP yesterday. You had an incredible return game early in the year. We were getting good returns from Horton and Derek Young. And then we got Shaheed, and then it was really off to the races, and we had maybe the best return man in football. Kick coverage and punt coverage was excellent. We gave up like 190-yard return in Tennessee. And other than that, nobody did anything to this return game, pretty much. And that's it, man. Every level, this team was dominant. And obviously, you can only compare yourself to your peers, but I'm going to say it again. This team played in the toughest division in football and one of the best divisions of all time. Doing everything that I just said with that schedule and with that setup and everything working to pull them down, it is one of the greatest teams that I think has ever been in the NFL, truly. And that is something to really appreciate because, again, they did it without having the elite quarterback. They didn't have, I can admit that. Sam Darnold's not as good as some of the other quarterbacks in this league. He's not. And I think any Seahawks fan can acknowledge that there are better quarterbacks than Sam Darnold in this league. And they did it without dominating the All-Pro team. I know that there were not a ton of Seahawks, although a decent amount on the All-Pro team. It's not like they had 10 All-Pros or anything like that. But you go up and down this team and what they accomplished this year. And then going through their division rivals in the postseason again and winning a playoff game by 5 touchdowns and only trailing in the postseason for a grand total of, I think it was 91 seconds across 3 games. And winning games, and in many cases, dominating games with portions of the team breaking down. Like yesterday, we dominated the Super Bowl, and our quarterback didn't even play that good of a game. We beat the Rams with the run game and the defense not really giving us anything, right? We beat the 49ers by 5 touchdowns, and Sam Darnold barely had to throw the ball. We blew out the Panthers in a game where our quarterback played bad, and the offense really couldn't get out of their own way for more than half of that game. You beat the Rams in a game where your quarterback turns the ball over multiple times. You lose the turnover battle 3-0, and you still find a way to win that game. The fact that you could strip away strengths of this team and they could still win over and over and over again, it is, I think, historical. I think this team is better than the 2013 team that won the Seahawks' first Super Bowl. I do. I think the offense is better by enough to make this group better. And I'm not saying they belong with the 85 Bears or some of those other historically all-time great teams, but understand this is not some weak Super Bowl winner. And there are going to be people out there that try to label them as such because yesterday's Super Bowl was not a very fun game. People are going to look at that Super Bowl and say, well, this was kind of a not very good year in the NFL, and the game was ugly because of it. But I'm telling you guys, we know better. This team had an incredible run, an incredible season, and I think they should be remembered as one of the better teams this league has ever seen. All right, see you guys later. Go Hawks, more stuff soon.